Good evening, everyone. While I'm getting this up, if you'd like to get your Bibles out and follow along, we're going to pick back up in Job chapter 41 tonight. Job chapter 41. So last week, we had talked about the Leviathan, which is what chapter 41 is all about. And we had started in on talking about what scholars in the past had debated Leviathan was. So we talked about some of those examples. But really, the most important takeaway here is that the Leviathan is this big, powerful sea creature that God has created, and he's talking to Job about this to illustrate his power, to illustrate the majesty that he has, to illustrate how God rules this creature in a way that Job never could. And God is very proud of this creature, and he is talking in depth about how this thing is made. And so that's where we're going to pick up tonight, and what we're going to focus on more of tonight is looking at the description of this animal that God has given to us. I was thinking on the way over here that, this mighty animal that God is describing to Job is meant to be humbling to Job. And I'm struggling with allergies today, so I can't stand up to some little flowers, so, much less a Leviathan. So it's just impressive what God can do with all of his creations. Let's see. So we talked about being sold at the fish market. I think we left off in verse 7. So Job chapter 41, we'll pick up in verse 7. It says, "Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again." Now, I think last week we had talked about how this was a creature that couldn't be tamed, and it would be difficult to battle. And here, verse 8 seems to imply that perhaps it could be killed by human hands, but it's definitely not something you'd want to do twice, right? Rick?
Right. This translation says, if you lay a hand on him, you will remember the battle and never repeat it.
Yeah.
It's like, if you actually do something, mess with him, you will not do it again.
So just stressing how difficult this creature would be to subdue, to fight, to conquer, right? You might succeed in killing it, probably with several of your friends, but you're not going to want to do it again. It's not something that you're going to set out to do more than once, right? And that kind of goes along with the verses that we read previously, where Leviathan's not going to be something that's hunted for food and sold in a fish market. He's not going to be hunted and turned into a pet for little kids to play with, right? This isn't that kind of animal. Did anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Addie.
It really leaves completely out the alligator or crocodile.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
That leaves out the crocodile and the alligator that some people think that it could be.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the more that you read through Job 41, the less likely a crocodile fits with that. I know that a lot of the commentaries that I read, it's usually the ones that said Behemoth was a hippo.
Yeah.
They tend to be the same people who are saying that Leviathan is probably an alligator, but I don't feel that either of those fit very accurately. And I think that as we read down, we see that. Judy?
Since last week, I've decided it's a giant electric eel.
Yeah? Well, we'll see. We'll see as we get down further here some other descriptions. It says, let's see, we said that. So let's read verses 9 to 11. It says, "Behold, your expectation is false. Will you be hurled down even at the sight of him? No one is so reckless that he dares to stir him. Who then is he who opposes me? Who has been first to give to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the entire heaven is mine. So, what is God saying in verses 9 to 11? Paraphrase that for me. What is God telling Job there?
If you can't overcome the Leviathan, how could you hope to stand against God?
Yeah, right? So God is the one who made Leviathan. And if Leviathan is giving you that much trouble, how could you ever hope to stand against God? Or your version might say to contend with God, right? Who's going to oppose God? All right, that's the message there. And look even at verse 11. He says, who has been the first to give to me that I should repay him? Right? Just kind of another way to show that God is first in the order of things. God created everything. God gave to everyone first, right? Who is there who gives to God first? There's no one. God did it first, right?
I like my version of the last part of 11. Everything in the heaven is mine.
Everything in the heaven is mine, yeah. Other thoughts? Comments? Yeah, Donna.
In verse 8, when I read it, I get the idea that he's saying, you can tangle with it, but you're not going to win, and you're not going to forget it either.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not something that you look forward to, right? Okay. So yeah, the basic idea of verses 9 to 11 is just that God has made this mighty creature, and if you can't handle that creature, how could you ever oppose God or contend with God, right? Now, after that section, God gets back into describing Leviathan once again. And so we're going to look at some of the different things that he says about the Leviathan here. So we'll read the next 5 verses, verse 12 down to verse 17. God says, I will not be silent about his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his graceful frame. Who can strip off his outer covering? Who can pierce his double armor? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth there is terror. His strong scales are his pride, locked as with a tight seal, one so close to another that no air can come between them. They are joined to one another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. And so God lists several things about this creature. So what are some of the things that God describes on Leviathan that we just read? No particular order, just what are some of the things that God's described here?
His outer armor.
His outer armor, yeah. What else?
Terrible teeth.
Terrible teeth, yeah. What else?
The scales on his body and they are tightly knit.
Yeah, tightly knit, right? It says they're so close together that air can't get in between. That's pretty close, right? So he lists off a bunch of these different things, right? So I just kind of threw some of them up here. He talks about his limbs and his parts. He talks about his graceful frame, which is interesting. So, it's graceful. His outer covering. Yours might say his garments, his double armor, or yours might say bridle. So depending on which translation you're reading, it might use a few different words, but they mean the same thing, right? So he's talking about this creature, and you just get a sense of the power of this animal, right? Here's a couple others that we mentioned. We talked about the doors of his face with his terrible teeth. What are the doors of the face?
Jaws.
The jaws, right? Yeah. Terrible jaws full of teeth. Strong scales, locked tight as a seal. And so far, like I said, all those seem to describe some kind of fearsome reptile, right? Now,
I have a question.
yeah,
Speaking of scales, does a whale have scales?
no,
So it's not a whale.
I wouldn't say it was a whale.
Does a shark have?
The shark has
I didn't
scales.
think a whale had scales.
Nope.
Had scales, but I'm just asking.
No. And the idea of Leviathan being a whale, I think, comes from some confusion about some of the terms that get used in the Bible in regards to large sea creatures, right? So if you look at the Hebrew words for some of the animals, right, there's Rahab, which is another word for serpent that gets used in various parts of the Old Testament. There's the word tannin, which gets used to mean similar things, sea monsters, serpents in the Old Testament. When you look at the story of Job and being swallowed up by a fish in the Old Testament, when it refers to that in the New Testament, it uses a word ketos, which is the Greek word that we get the word cetacean from, which means whale. But in Greek, it could mean sharks, whales. It wasn't so specific as our terms today. We just based our words off of that. So that's kind of where some of these original words led to a little bit of confusion and give people the idea that Leviathan is a whale. There's also, just over time, some words take on new meanings. So, for example, if I say to you that someone is a Goliath, am I saying that they're the same guy who fought David?
No, you're just saying
No, I'm just saying he's a big guy, right? Because in today's terms, Goliath is a word for something that's huge. It's big, right? It's a giant. That's how over time, different words in the Bible can take on new meanings after hundreds and hundreds of years. So over time, Leviathan just came to mean something big, so usually in terms of a sea monster or a sea creature. It got those additional layers of meaning over time. And that's where a lot of the ideas about whale come from. But nowhere in the Bible does it talk about Leviathan being a whale. Does that help?
I was thinking my Bible had a reference as a whale.
Well, if you find it, I want to know about it. Because I can make my study better.
Footnote.
Well, again,
Not actually a verse.
yeah,
That was somebody's idea.
right. And I would argue with them on that one because I don't think that's correct. But there are certainly people who interpret it as a whale. I just don't think that that's correct.
I'm sitting here thinking, okay, well, we're actually not going to even see a Leviathan in this day and age anymore.
Right.
It was something prehistoric,
Probably. Yeah. I don't think it's alive anymore.
just like dinosaurs aren't alive anymore.
Right. Cookie?
Yeah, my Bible says in the footnotes, a large animal, exact identity unknown.
Yep. And that's one thing I do want to stress, right, is that you can't walk away from here and say, Josh told me it was this, because I don't know exactly what that animal was. I can only tell you what Bible scholars have debated over time. And there's a group that certainly thinks it's a crocodile. There are some scholars out there that will tell you it's a whale. And there are others that will tell you other things. All I want to do is tell you what's been said about it and read the description here. So.
And there may have just been one, they may not have been able to reproduce. Maybe there was just one
Could be.
of them.
Yeah, we just don't know enough about it. We just have that description, right?
And
No.
mine says sea creature.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a sea creature based off of Job 41 and also some of the other verses. I think we talked about Isaiah being one that said it was a sea creature as well, Isaiah 27. Now, when you get to this next verse here, verse 18, this is where some people will use verse 18 to back up that they think God is being symbolic here, or else it's describing a dragon, or a mythical creature, sometimes people will say, right? When you talk about sea serpent, some people think that it's being symbolic. And that's because if you read verse 18 and 19, it says, his sneezes flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eye of dawn. From his mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Now, that's describing an animal that's breathing fire, right? That's the way I read that. So now that's a problem for all those people out there who think it's a crocodile, right? Because I don't know a lot about crocodiles, but I've never seen one breathe fire, right? So that's where, for those people who believe it's a crocodile, they will interpret this as being poetic, right? But this also throws into the mix, maybe it's symbolism, right? That's what some scholars will say, that it's being symbolic. And I don't think that that's the case. My personal opinion is that unless the Bible gives you reason to believe otherwise, it's being literal. And so I don't have a lot of reason in these verses or in the rest of the context of the book of Job to believe it's being anything other than literal. So I think that God is really describing a creature that he had made that doesn't exist anymore, right? It's extinct, but that was able to breathe fire. That's my opinion of it. What do you all think? Donna?
I think it's sad that we can believe that God created heaven and earth, man, and every other animal, but something that we've never seen, we have a hard time believing he did that.
Yeah.
God could create anything he wanted.
Yeah. Jim, you had your hand up too.
We need to be careful of how we look at the things that are being said here.
Mm-hmm.
God said, I did create this. It's
Yeah.
a fierce creature, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
What's the point of what he's saying?
Yeah.
You need to realize who I am. I am the one who created this.
Exactly.
As fierce as this animal is, I created it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the whole reason that he's talking about this animal even in the first place, right? It's not so that you can try and figure out exactly what it is, right? Although in his day and age, Job would have been familiar with this one. We obviously aren't thousands of years later. But it's to show the point of his power, right? And that's why he's describing this animal to Job. And so again, I definitely follow a very literal understanding of this. I don't think that a symbolic approach is the correct one here. But as you read through the commentaries that you have at home or that are attached in your Bible, you might see someone talking about it being symbolic, and that's kind of where the basis of that comes from, especially when you tie it to Isaiah later, where Isaiah does use the word Leviathan to describe things symbolically. And so they'll just kind of tie those together. So that's why it's very important that we study the Bible, that we rightly divide the word of truth, right? We can't just mix it up however we feel like. We got to make sure that we're reading it correctly. Any other questions or comments on that section?
I
Pat?
had a comment.
Yeah.
We all know that whatever God creates, he can destroy.
Uh-huh.
Because he said the last days he's going to destroy everything in this world that he's made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in one of the Psalms that we read last week, it talks about God being able to destroy Leviathan as well. Matt?
I know there's today a bombardier beetle,
Yeah.
which is of course, a small insect, but it produces a couple of different chemicals that it shoots out of its hind end that it causes a small little fire.
Yeah.
Very, very hot thing, which people didn't believe it until they studied it and realized it. And so
Right.
It's not much of a leap of faith to think,
No, it's
well,
not.
He's already created this, and we see it today, that he could have created a larger scale thing that could actually blow fire like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we see some of those examples in nature of those things already being possible. So to have them present in another animal is not that hard to believe. Yeah.
his eyes are described. How would you describe his eyes?
So that's a good question. So in the NASB, it says that he has eyes like the dawn. If you're reading from the King James Version, it says his eyes are like the eyelids of morning. To me, those are pretty much the same thing. And I didn't write down what the New King James says. Does anyone have the New King James open? It says morning? Okay.
So it's sort of like his eyes are half closed and half awake.
I'm not 100% sure if that's what it's talking about or if it's talking about like the color of a sunrise. I don't know if it's talking about the shape of the eye or if it's talking about the color of the eye.
And I was thinking it would be a half opened eye.
Yeah, and I could certainly see it being like a half open shape. Like I said, it could be talking about the color. It's hard to say exactly what's meant by that.
That was an interesting.
Yeah, it is. Oh, sorry, Rick, I didn't see your hand.
It's okay. It could also mean talking about how bright they are because of the flashes.
It could be,
light.
yeah.
And this translation and the NIV also says rays of the eyes are like rays of dawn. Like
Oh, okay.
bright eyes.
So maybe they're bright, yeah.
So it could be a combination of those things.
Yeah, I think any of those could be a good explanation for that. Let's see. So we already read verse 19. Verse 20 kind of goes along with what we just read. It says, "From his nostrils smoke goes out, as from a boiling pot and burning reeds." Right? So again, that kind of going along with the rest of the fire-breathing piece of it. And again, if you're reading from one of the other versions, slightly different words, but the overall meaning is the same, right? So if you're talking and saying, "From his mouth go burning torches," in the King James it reads, "Out of his mouth go burning lamps." It's pretty much the same thing. So I think most of the descriptions here match up fairly closely.
I know this is a dumb question to ask, but do you think maybe this is for the mythical beasts that later on that man had as gods and all kinds of things? They could have taken the descriptions from this and made these mythical beasts, like the dragons and things that shoot fire and.
Yeah, I think that this sort of thing could have definitely inspired myths around the world of dragons. If you have a fire-breathing creature, I can't imagine what would be a better source of those legends, right?
That's what I was thinking, because later on, they had all kinds of dragons out there. They were mythical, they wasn't real.
Yeah.
They breathed fire, they did this and did that, and it sounds like.
Yeah, that could have been the source of a lot of myths. I could see that.
In the book of Revelation, we have one.
We have one what?
The one that's got all those heads. Breathing.
Oh, the dragon? Yeah.
Dragon,
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts or comments on the fire-breathing part before we keep going here? Okay. So verse 21 says, "His breath sets coals aglow, and a flame goes forth from his mouth." See, it doesn't get more clear than that. It says, "In his neck dwells strength, and dismay leaps before him." So this verse I thought was interesting because this is where I did see some differences in translation that I think changed the meaning of that verse a little bit. Mine says, in verse 22, it says, "And dismay leaps before him." If you're reading the King James Version, it says, "Sorrow is turned to joy before him." And then in the New King James Version, it says, "Sorrow dances before him." Okay? So I think that given what we're reading about this fearsome animal, I think the best translation here is, in my opinion, the New King James Version. Because what it's saying is, if sorrow dances before this thing, it's saying that sorrow goes before him, is what it's saying. I don't think it's saying that sorrow suddenly turns to joy in the face of this animal. That doesn't seem like a really good translation. So, and the New King James, I think, gets it best. The NASB, I tend to like that one pretty well, but I don't really think it gets the idea across here. But yeah, I think that what it's trying to tell you is that this is such a fearsome animal that dismay goes before it. I think that that is what it's trying to convey here. Rick?
Yeah, I think the idea is that it basically terrifies everything in front of
Yes.
it, right?
Yeah.
The idea is it scares and just like if you saw it, yeah, you would be dismayed and terrified and you'd try to get away like me and a shark in the ocean. You know?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that that's what it's going for here. Okay, so then verse 23 says, the folds of his flesh are joined together, firm and immovable on him. I think that this kind of goes hand in hand with the rest of the verses about his armor or his interlocked scales that air can't get between. I think that it's expanding upon that a little bit. Verse 24 says, his heart is as firm as a stone and as firm as a lower millstone. Now, what do you think that that means? Talking about his heart being as firm as stone. I thought this one was odd. Rick?
Yeah, my translation says his chest.
Okay.
I was thinking that this was talking about how strong he was defensively with his armor and everything. But
No, I think that that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I don't know another way to read that other than just it's trying to tell you about the strength of the animal. Right? He's not weak-hearted, in other words, right? Donna?
I think it's trying to tell you that you're not going to be able to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
You can't pierce it. You can't stab him in the heart. You can't get through. Everything's so tightly knit.
Yeah.
I don't think you can kill him.
Yeah. Matt and then Pat.
The same kind of idea, just the chest versus heart. Like that's how you get to the heart.
Yeah.
The chest that's armored.
Pat?
I know this is a far stretch, but I just thought it was a big turtle.
No, I mean, turtles have pretty hard armor, right?
None of that, they got bones.
Yeah. Yeah, so either way, pretty thick skin, right? And then the next two verses here.
What is a millstone?
I think, if I remember right, millstones are used for grinding grain. Isn't that right?
it's like a big granite wheel. Think of it that way, and they use it to just grind the grain. That's what they used to use.
It's been a long time since I've seen one.
A wheel made of stone.
Yes, that's what I was implying.
Pat?
Over
And
by Shreve, there's a place called Millbrook, and they do have a mill that has a big stone.
Yeah. Jim, you had your hand up?
Well, this huge stone we're talking about had
Yeah.
grooves cut in it that allowed the grain as it was ground to proceed to the outside and be taken off as a meal.
Gotcha.
That's describing his heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a heart like stone, as firm as a stone, a big stone, right?
Extremely hard.
Verse 25 and 26 says, when he rises up, the mighty are afraid. Because of the crashing, they are bewildered. The sword that reaches him cannot prevail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. Okay, so again, this is where in the translations, if you're looking at those different weapons that are listed, yours might read slightly differently. So mine says javelin, yours might say, I don't even know how to pronounce that, Harbergian? So, different word for it, but the idea is different weapons are ineffective against him. So. It says, in verse 27, he regards iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. And so, again, if you still think that's a crocodile, you might want to take a step back and look again, right? Because honestly, even with strong crocodiles, I don't know of one that couldn't be contained with some iron and bronze, right? You have to be pretty strong for iron and bronze to be nothing to you. So, Verse 28 says, the arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned to stubble before him. So again, more weapons that are ineffective against this big animal. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about his armor again. It says, clubs are regarded as stubble. He laughs at the rattling of a javelin. His underparts are like sharp pieces of pottery. He spreads out like a threshing sledge on the mud. He makes the depths boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. So again, just a big, fearsome animal that dwells in the ocean, that can make the depths boil. Very fierce. Questions or thoughts on that part? Okay. Now, this next one, again, Job is a poetic book, and sometimes it gets a little poetic on us. Verse 32 says, behind him, he illuminates a pathway. One would think the deep to be gray-haired. Now, that's the way that mine reads. Now, if you have the King James Version, it will say, he maketh a path to shine after him. One would think the deep to be hoary. And if you're reading the New King James, it says, he leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. Again, I tend to favor the New King James Version for this one because it's talking about a wake, right? So if you see something if you see a boat moving fast through the water, it leaves a wake behind it. And you can see the foam is like white hair. That's what it's talking about. It's like it gives the deep white hair or gray hair. That's what it's talking about. So when it says it leaves a shining path behind it, it leaves a wake behind it. So. Verse 33 says, nothing on earth is like him, one made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. So again, just stressing this animal's rank in nature, where it stands on the ladder over all these other animals, right? There's nothing like this thing. This thing doesn't have fear. It's not afraid of things because it's so mighty. The only thing that can put this thing in its place, as it's said before, is God, right? Now again, we want to just take a step back and remember why God's talking about this animal, right? So again, the whole point of this entire chapter, God was leading up to this when he was describing all these different animals, right? He started small. He started with some goats and some deer, and he worked his way up. We talked about oxes and ostriches and horses, and then we get to the big two, which were the behemoth and the Leviathan. And God works his way up all these and basically explains to Job that I created all these wonderful animals. I sustain them, I provide for them, and at the top of the ladder, none can control these things but me, right? And this is all meant to show Job that when it comes to Job's questions, God has all this under control, right? If God made these things, and he's aware of these things and how they work, and he can control them, then Job's life is certainly under control, right? Questions, thoughts? Matt, then Rick.
Jumping back to verse 11.
Yeah.
He says, who has given to me that I should repay him? Basically, no one has given God anything. He doesn't owe anybody anything.
Yeah.
And thinking of the context, he doesn't owe Job an explanation for why Job's going through what he's going through, which is kind of the crux of it too, right?
It is, yeah, absolutely. Rick, what?
Notice here at the end, he talks about king over all the sons or children of pride, or like mine says, over the proud.
Yep.
Over all the proud. So he's talking about humbling
Yes, that's a good point.
Humbling Job, humbling us, realizing that we can't even do anything with this animal. We
Yeah.
should not be messing with God in a bad way.
Absolutely.
We should be honoring the Lord. So.
Absolutely. Now, next week we're gonna bring this all home, right? So God has started in chapter 38, asking Job all these questions and building up his case and explaining himself to Job in the manner that he chose. So then we're gonna see the outcome of all of the entire book of Job when we get to chapter 42 next week. What's that? We'll get to it the next following week. Thank you, Addie. I forgot about that.
I knew you did.
So you just have to wait in anticipation, right? Well, by way of invitation, if you'd like to open up your Bibles, I want to read to you Psalm 73. Psalm 73. Psalm 73 says, a psalm of Asaph. God certainly is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet came close to stumbling, and my steps had almost slipped. For I was envious of the arrogant, as I saw prosperity of the wicked. For there are no pains in their death, and their belly is fat. They are not in trouble like other people, nor are they tormented with the rest of mankind. So right off the bat, we see the psalmist here telling us of a moment of weakness, which I'm sure we can all relate to. We all have those moments in life where we come close to stumbling. And he says that he comes close, not that he had stumbled, but he was coming close. Because as he looked around, he saw these wicked people, and they were living what appeared to be good lives, in that he was envious of what they had. And he starts to describe these things. Notice, there's no pains of death, and their belly is fat. So they were well fed. They were not in danger. They're not in trouble like other people, and they're not tormented. In verse 6, he says, therefore arrogance is their necklace. The garment of violence covers them. Their eye bulges from fatness, and the imaginations of their hearts overflow. They mock and wickedly speak of oppression. They speak from on high. They have their mouth set against heaven, and their tongue parades through the earth. Therefore his people return here, and abundant waters are drunk by them. They say, how does God know? And is there knowledge with the Most High? Behold, these are the wicked, and always at ease they have increased in wealth. So the psalmist is describing these people that they have seemingly few worries in life. They have wealth and prosperity. They doubt God and don't care to follow them. They say, where's the knowledge in following the Most High, right? And they're always at ease. And so he's looking at these people living these wicked lives, but enjoying prosperity and thinking, that would be nice to have that prosperity, right? That's what he's saying. He almost stumbled. He says in verse 13, surely in vain I have kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence. For I have been stricken all day long and punished every morning. So he's saying, what was the point of trying to maintain my morals? You know, I went through all this rigor every single day, and yet I suffered. So what was the point? I could have just been doing whatever these wicked people did and enjoying prosperity. He says, if I had said, I will speak this way, behold, I would have betrayed the generation of your children. When I thought of understanding this, it was troublesome in my sight. Notice this realization that he was envious of this other lifestyle was troublesome to his spirit when he realized, man, you know, I'm suffering and I'm working hard to be righteous, and they're not working hard at all, and it seems like they're reaping every kind of reward. That bothered his spirit. But now notice verse 17. Until I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I perceived their end. You indeed put them on slippery ground. You drop them into ruin. How they are destroyed in a moment. They are utterly swept away by sudden terrors. Like a dream when one awakes, Lord, when stirred, you will despise their image. When my heart was embittered and I was pierced within, then I was stupid and ignorant. I was like an animal before you. And so the psalmist is realizing when he came close to envying the wicked because of their lifestyle and the temporary joys it brought them, he realized just that their ultimate end after this life is over is destruction. And he realized that it was stupid to be wishing that he had what they had. He finishes up by saying, nevertheless, I am continually with you. You have taken hold of my right hand. You will guide me with your plan, and afterward receive me to glory. Whom do I have in heaven but you? And with you I desire nothing on earth. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. For behold, those who are far from you will perish. You have destroyed all those who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, the nearness of God is good for me. I have made the Lord God my refuge, so that I may tell of your works. I read this because the psalmist is having one of those heart-to-heart, very human moments that we can all identify with. All of us have gone through something similar with that before where, doing the right thing is never the easy thing. And sometimes it's much harder than other days. And we struggle to carry that burden from time to time. And usually while we are struggling to carry that burden of doing what is right, we can look around and see people that aren't struggling at all, and they can just live life however they want. And sometimes it can cause you to almost stumble, or it can cause conflict within your spirit. You can ask yourself, why am I putting myself through this? Why am I doing this? But as the psalmist notes, he realizes that ultimately, after this life is over, those wicked are going to suffer destruction, whereas he will be continually with God. And so I bring this up just to show that we all suffer those moments of doubt. And it's a very human, natural thing. It happens to the best of us. It happened to the psalmist. It happens to you and me. And there are times when, we need prayers of encouragement. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. As long as we make God our refuge, we're going to be secure and we're going to be with him till the end. And so tonight I encourage you that if you are struggling with something, to make God your refuge. If you need the prayers of the congregation to help you through, instead of actually stumbling, let us pull you away from that stumbling block. Let us help you. Let us pray for you. Let us do whatever we can to help you to stay on the path that's right and true. So if you have any need whatsoever, please come forward while we stand and while we sing.